I'm going to pass over now to John Howell, who wants me to say he's back from South Africa, for those who didn't know, where he's been for the last few years. He's been based out in South Africa. You were director from 1987 to 1997.
Thank you, Alison, and for inviting me, and so many of my old friends. It's a wonderful evening for me, and lovely to see you again, Vince. Coming here, I mean, in the heart of really British institutions, this part of London, and ODI, I think at 50, is becoming a British institution. Now, leaving aside publicly funded institutions, we're rather benign towards institutions, but we do tend not to ask what they're doing there in the first place. Now, I'd like to just explain to some of you briefly, how we are here. What was the first place for ODI? And you've got to remember, in 1960 when ODI was established, so a number of countries we currently work with weren't independent. There was no Ministry of Overseas Development, and it was some years before the government started funding universities to set up development centres and regional centres like South Asia and West Africa. So ODI was very much ahead of its time. So the question is, why? What was going on here? Now, I didn't join until 1977, but there were still members of council who were part of that pioneer group, the founding group. And if they weren't members, there were people representing their interests. And what was striking about ODI at the time was the very strong city influence on ODI. We had some of the major trading companies were there, Unilever, Roundtree, some of the big banks were there, Barclays and the Standard and Chartered banks were there. And they were still quite active in supporting ODI. And they had been very active at the beginning in establishing ODI and securing the very important Ford Foundation support. Now, why were they doing it? Some of it was the Quaker tradition. I mean, we spoke of upliftment, a term we were using are still using in South Africa, an old Victorian term, upliftment of the poor. But it was nothing to do with their commercial interests. They all had, of course, suppliers, customers in developing countries, but their real interest was actually how could British trade and aid policies genuinely promote economic development. That was their concern. It really was about policy effectiveness. And if you look at the first few years' work of ODI, it's principally on British aid, on the Bretton Woods institutions, then seen as very much an Anglo-American initiative, and trade preferences. So that was the early ODI. Now, the question really is, has it changed so much? And my answer is yes and no. I mean, yes, it's clearly changed. It's much less economistic than it was when you were there, Vince. Much wider sense of development issues. It's less Atlanticist, much more concerned now with Europe than we ever were in the early days. And there's a third thing that I remember, a bit less economistic, less Atlanticist. Let me refer to my note if you don't mind. I did think this through, actually. Yes, less aid-centric, actually. Quite important. We're less concerned with aid as the principal instrument of development. So we have changed. At the same time, a lot of the work that ODI does, when we're asked, as directors are asked and have an opportunity for some public prominence, Alison recently, Simon before her, taking on aid critics. In my time, it was Bernard Ingham who I was able to engage with, who I always saw as a master's voice. What we're able to say when we have that opportunity is that understanding the mysteries of economic development at the country level are very important. They're not straightforward. The complexities of rural poverty at the household level, again, very complex and important. And unless people can actually take on board those development issues, the arguments about aid, which as Vince says, have been won, but nonetheless, the arguments remain really about is it effective or not? Because long term, we still have a battle to argue there should be public financial support for developing countries. We have a moment of opportunity here where Vince thinks the argument's been won, but it will come back. It may come back sooner than you think, Vince, you never know. what we're able to do when we do engage is to actually take the aid issue and talk about development. And in that way, we've really been quite faithful to the founders of ODI. They may have come from the city, they may have had different interests to us, but nonetheless, their principal concerns were how could British aid policy be effective? And we're still concerned with aid effectiveness ultimately, through development, through poverty, not just Britain, Europe, Bretton Woods. So, in my view, after 50 years, we're still at it. Nothing has really changed. We still have the same central issues to address and engage with the public. Alison, do you want an anecdote, or is that what we'll have to do?
That will do. Thank you.